Hi, I'm Melanie, and this is Unfashioned, a podcast about unraveling what no longer fits and re-wearing what was always real. This season is about breaking a garment down piece by piece: the label, the care instructions, the fabric, the seams, the thread. Each part holds its own meaning, and each one opens a different way of thinking about how we move through our lives. Lately, I've been looking at my closet differently. Instead of thinking about outfits or trends, I've been paying attention to what a garment actually is made of. I have been looking closely at small details we usually overlook once something in our lives becomes familiar. We began with labels, the names, the sizes, stitched inside our clothes that suggest identity, belonging, and status before we even try something on. Labels give us language. They tell us how something is meant to be seen. But a garment does not stop at the label. If you look a little further inside, you will find another tag. It is smaller and quieter, but just as influential. It offers instructions about how the garment should be handled, how it should be treated, and how carefully it needs to be cared for. This episode begins there. Today we turn our attention to care. Care instructions exist to protect a garment. They tell you how to wash it, how to dry it, and how to handle it so it lasts. The language is careful and precise. Wash cold, lay flat, do not wring, do not tumble dry, handle with care. When you slow down and really read them, there is a quiet message underneath. Be careful, move gently, avoid damage. That language feels familiar because most of us have learned similar instructions long before we ever read a care label. We learned how to behave, how to stay safe, and how to avoid mistakes. We learned how to manage ourselves so we would not be too much or too difficult to handle. Those lessons were often absorbed quietly. They come through expectations rather than direct rules. Be professional and agreeable. Be easy to work with. Learn how to anticipate what is needed before it is asked for. I felt this most clearly when I was in my career. As I moved from school into a professional design space, I learned very quickly how to be careful. Be careful with my ideas and my tone. Be careful with how much of myself I brought into the room. I learned how to read expectations and adjust instinctively. That kind of care was rewarded. It made things smoother. It made me reliable. And it made me someone others could count on. At first, those instructions felt supportive. They offered structure and predictability. They helped things function. Just like with clothing, following the rules made things last longer. But over time, things slowly changed. Being careful began to feel like being contained. I noticed myself editing before listening, managing instead of exploring, and holding shape instead of stretching. Care slowly stopped being about protection and started becoming a way of staying accepted. This is where care can turn into control. We begin monitoring ourselves closely. We avoid risk and we prioritize preservation over experience. Without realizing it, we start living as if our job is to maintain the form we already fit into, rather than allowing ourselves to move and change. Care instructions were not written with harm in mind. They exist because something is valued, because it matters. But sometimes in trying to keep something intact, we forget it was also meant to be lived in. Over time, the rules we learn about care begin to shift. What once felt like guidance slowly becomes responsibility and eventually something we carry without questioning. Care stops being a choice and becomes a posture we have to hold. Instead of listening inward, we learn how to manage. We learn how to keep things steady, how to prevent rupture, how to anticipate what might be needed before it is asked for. Preservation becomes the goal. There is a parallel in clothing. At a certain point, you stop reading the care tag. You already know how careful you're supposed to be. You move differently in the garment. You avoid strain. You protect it from wear. The piece remains intact, but it is no longer fully lived in. I recognize this pattern most clearly in my former marriage. For a long time, care meant tending to everything and everyone else. It meant being attentive and patient and emotionally available. It meant keeping the household running, the emotional temperature regulated, and the larger structure intact. I learned how to sense what was needed and respond quickly. I learned how to smooth things over before they became problems. That kind of care was consistent and it was quiet. It rarely was acknowledged because it was reliable, and over time, it became expected. What I did not realize at first was how one sided that care had become. I was so focused on maintaining stability that I stopped noticing the absence of care coming back towards me. My needs grew smaller, my voice softened, parts of me went unexpressed because they did not fit into the role I was holding. Care slowly turned into self erasure, not all at once, but gradually. I stayed attentive to everyone else while losing track of myself. I remained present while becoming less visible. The structure held, but I felt myself disappearing inside it. This is how care tightens. It becomes less about mutual support and more about endurance. You keep going because things depend on you. You stay careful because disruption feels dangerous. You learn to survive inside a role that leaves very little room for you to be your real self. Eventually, the instructions narrow. There is less space for honesty that might unsettle the balance. Less room to ask what you need or whether the care you are giving is ever returned. Without realizing it, you begin living as if your own needs were something to manage quietly rather than something that deserves attention. This is where pressure forms, not from conflict, but from imbalance, from caring deeply while no longer being cared for, from holding something together at the cost of losing yourself inside it. Eventually, care leaves evidence. In clothing, it appears slowly. Fabric softens where it has been handled most. Seams relax. Areas of movement grow thinner with time. Nothing announces itself as broken. The garment simply begins to show where life has passed through it. The body carries wear in much the same way. When care has been uneven for too long, the effects are subtle at first. Energy fades more quickly. Tension settles into a place it never used to live. There is a growing sense of distance between you and what you are doing each day and how present you feel while doing it. This is often when intuition begins to surface, not as clear directive, but as a quiet persistence, a feeling that something has shifted, a sense that the way things are being handled no longer match what is needed. You may not be able to explain it yet, but the awareness is there. A garment can look perfectly fine on the hanger and still feel wrong the moment you put it on. Nothing about it has failed. The fit was not suddenly changed. What was changed is the relationship between the garment and the body wearing it. Life works the same way. You can keep showing up, keep doing what is expected, and still feel the strain underneath. Care that once sustained you begins to exhaust you. What was manageable becomes heavy. What felt stable starts to feel restrictive. Wear is not a sign of failure. It is a record of use, of time, and of devotion. But when wear is ignored, it deepens. Fabric eventually weakens. Bodies eventually push back. There comes a moment when continuing as before costs more than it preserves. This is the pause before something shifts, the quiet recognition that care cannot remain one-sided. The moment when you begin to wonder whether the way you have been holding everything together is the same way you want to keep living. Garments are created to be worn, not protected indefinitely. Fabric is meant to soften, stretch, and respond to the body that lives inside it. Time and movement give clothing its character, and without that exchange, something essential never develops. People are no different. A life cannot be sustained through management alone. When every decision is shaped by caution and every reaction is measured to avoid disruption, your attention shifts away from the present. Following every rule requires consistent awareness. You begin tracking yourself instead of trusting yourself. Energy is spent maintaining stability rather than exploring what feels true. Over time, that vigilance dulls spontaneity and it limits emotional range even when everything appears to be functioning well. The cost of this carefulness rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly as emotional fatigue, as a subtle distance from desire, as a growing sense that joy requires effort. Nothing has collapsed, but something has thinned. In clothing, this is the garment that remains pristine but unfamiliar. It looks correct, yet it never fully belongs to the body wearing it. The lack of wear has preserved it, but it also prevented it from becoming personal. In life, roles can begin to replace honesty. Responses become rehearsed. Choices are filtered through obligation. You continue doing what works because it has always worked, even when it no longer feels aligned with who you are becoming. It is important to ask who benefits from this level of restraint. Often, structures remain intact. Relationships stay predictable. Systems continue without disruption. What goes unnoticed is the cost of the person maintaining the stability. Strict adherence to every rule may prevent you from breaking, but it also can prevent you from fully living. Preservation shapes us, but it can't not substitute for vitality. Eventually, the question moves away from how to maintain what exists and towards whether it's still being lived in from the inside. Over time, you begin to notice that the way you have been caring for everything may not include yourself. The original instructions focused on keeping things intact, but they did not account for how much you could carry or how long you would be able to carry it. With clothing, wear teaches you this. A garment responds to attention. It needs different handling once it has been lived in. What once required restraint may now need gentler treatment. Care shifts from following rules to responding to reality. The same adjustment happens internally. You begin to listen more closely to what you feel instead of defaulting to what you should do. You notice when something asks for a rest rather than endurance. You recognize when staying quiet costs more than speaking honestly. Caring for yourself starts to mean paying attention instead of pushing through. Rewriting the instructions does not require a dramatic change. It shows up in small decisions. You slow down without apologizing. You choose ease when effort is no longer necessary. You allow your needs to exist without negotiating them away. This kind of care is not indulgent. It is not responsive. It is rooted in listening to what has now been worn thin and what still feels strong. It acknowledges that care must change as life changes. When you begin treating yourself as something worth tending to rather than something to manage, the rules soften. The instruction becomes more flexible. Care becomes something that supports life instead of containing it. Take a moment to consider the rules you still follow without questioning them. Notice when expectations guide your choices automatically and which ones feel heavier than they used to. Pay attention to how you care for yourself physically. Notice how you rest, how you eat, and how you move, and even how you recover. Observe whether your body is treated with the same patience and attention you offer to everything else you are responsible for. Consider how often you push through discomfort instead of responding to it. Notice where the effort has become a habit and where listening might offer something different. Think about what your body has been asking for quietly. There may be nothing here to correct or fix. This is simply just an invitation to notice how care shows up, both internally and physically, and whether it still fits the life you are living now. This season of Unfashioned is an invitation to slow down and look more closely, to turn a garment inside out and notice the parts we usually ignore: the labels, the instructions, the fabric, and the seams. Each one tells a story about how something was made and how it has been handled over time. This episode was about care, the rules we learn, the habits we carry, and the quiet cost of holding everything together for too long. It was also about listening again, not to instructions written long ago, but to what is present now. In the next story, we'll move deeper into the garment and spend time with the fabric. We will talk about texture and weight and what it means to choose what touches your body every day. New episodes of Unfashioned are released bi-weekly, giving each story room to settle and space to live alongside it. I'm Melanie, and this is Unfashioned. Until next time, live gently, let care support you, not contain you.